Chris never thought the day would come when Linda would become just another memory. They had spent 3 years together, laughing, fighting, growing, dreaming. He knew relationships could end, but not theirs. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. Until one Friday evening, 3 weeks before her wedding to Taylor, Chris came home to a box sitting on his doorstep. Every single gift he'd ever given her was packed inside. No note, just silence. At first, he stood staring at it, half thinking it was a mistake. But no, that was her handwriting on the label. Neat, cold. It felt like she'd erased him from her. Life with one final stroke of the pen. Inside the box were the little things that once meant everything. The necklace from their 2nd anniversary. The hoodie she always stole from his closet. The handwritten poems he thought were silly, but she once adored. She even included the perfume he had picked for her birthday. The same one she'd worn every time she came over to his place. The scent was still there, lingering like a ghost. Chris carried the box into his apartment, sat on the floor, and stared at it for hours. He didn't cry. Not because he wasn't hurting, but because he was too numb to feel anything yet. The kind of numb that made everything feel far away. Like it was happening to someone else. He remembered her smile, how it used to light up a room. How she would randomly text him lines from songs they both loved. Now she was marrying someone else. Just like that. A week passed before Chris ran into Mary, Linda's bridesmaid and best friend. She was standing outside a cafe near his apartment, sipping iced coffee and scrolling through her phone. When she saw him, her eyes widened. She looked guilty. She should. She knew. Everyone knew. "Hey," she said softly, setting her drink down on the bench beside her. "You look tired." "I wonder why," Chris said dryly, stuffing his hands in his hoodie pocket. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, I didn't expect a lot of things lately." There was a pause. She looked down, shifting uncomfortably. "She didn't have to return the gifts like that." Chris snorted. "No, she didn't. But she did. That's her way of closing doors, right? Clean and heartless." Mary glanced around, leaned closer. "I probably shouldn't say this, but she's not as happy as she looks. The whole wedding, it's more for show than anything." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you should come," Mary said, surprising even herself with the words. "To the wedding. Are you insane?" "Maybe. But part of me thinks she needs to see what she gave up." Chris laughed, though there was no humor in it. "What? Show up and act like I'm okay? Like none of this destroyed me?" Mary smirked. "No. Show up and remind her you didn't break." That night, Chris sat with the box again. This time, he opened it and laid everything out, each gift, each memory. He ran his fingers along the soft fabric of the hoodie. The necklace still sparkled in the light. Then, a wild idea took root in his mind. Not out of pettiness, not out of revenge, but maybe, just maybe, for closure. If she didn't want his gifts, maybe her bridesmaids would. Chris called Mary the next morning. "You still want me at that wedding?" "Yes." "Good. I've got gifts for all of you." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask, but he could hear the curiosity in her voice, or maybe it was concern. When the day came, Chris walked into that wedding venue like a storm in disguise, calm on the surface, but carrying everything he'd ever been through in his eyes. The guests whispered. Taylor looked confused. Linda froze, the second she saw him. He smiled politely, nodded, and then he began handing out the gifts, one by one. The first to receive a gift was Mary. Chris approached her with quiet confidence, carrying the same box that had once gutted him. She looked startled but didn't back away. Everyone was watching, guests mid-conversation now whispering, Linda's bridesmaids stealing glances, unsure whether to smile or freeze. Chris held out the perfume bottle. You always said you loved this scent. Now it's yours." Mary blinked. "This was Linda's—" "Not anymore," he said flatly. She gave it back. Mary took it slowly, glancing between Chris and Linda. The bottle glittered under the chandelier light, catching the attention of the woman of the hour, Linda herself, still frozen at the far end of the hall. Her mouth parted slightly, and though she didn't say a word, her eyes were screaming 1,000 things. Chris moved on before anyone could speak. The next bridesmaid, Hannah, stood stiffly by the gift table. He pulled out the delicate gold necklace, the one Linda had once called the prettiest thing anyone's ever gotten me. Chris placed it gently in Hannah's hands. "Genuine gold," he said. "Thoughtful gift, wasted on someone who didn't want it." Hannah flushed red, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Is this a joke?" "No," Chris replied calmly. "It's a reallocation of resources." Gasps spread across the room like wildfire. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Even the music had lowered, like the DJ was uncertain if this was part of the program. Chris didn't care. He had one more item left in the box, the hoodie. The same gray hoodie Linda had worn 100 times, always pulling it over her head when she was sad, hungover, or just feeling like being close to him. He walked up to Megan, the third bridesmaid. She looked nervous. He offered the hoodie without a word. She hesitated. "This is personal," Megan whispered. Chris gave a small smile. "Not anymore. It's just fabric now." She took it, slowly, like it was radioactive. Then he turned to face Linda. The room fell completely silent. She stepped forward, her dress clinging to her like a lie she couldn't shed. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "What are you doing?" Chris tilted his head. "Just giving away some things no one wanted. You know, like me." Her face changed. There was a crack, something vulnerable and real beneath the perfect bridal. Makeup. "This isn't you, Chris. You returned everything I gave you. I'm just making sure it doesn't go to waste." Taylor stepped forward now, clearly uncomfortable. "All right, man, that's enough. You made your point." Chris looked him up and down. "Did I?" Linda stepped between them before Taylor could respond. "You shouldn't have come." "You invited me the second you returned those gifts," Chris said quietly. "That was your message, right? Loud and clear. I got it. But you forgot something." "What?" "You don't get to rewrite the past and pretend it never mattered. You wore that necklace when you told me you loved me. You cried in that hoodie the night your dog died. That perfume? You said it made you feel safe." His voice broke a little there, just enough for her to notice. "But if it all meant nothing, then fine. Let the girls wear your lies." Linda looked like she'd been slapped. People didn't know where to look anymore. Some guests had sat down, like it was theater. Others quietly made their way to the door, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Mary stood still, holding the perfume like it was glass-shaped from guilt. Chris took a deep breath. "Anyway, congrats. You look beautiful, as always." And then he walked away, past the staring guests, past the blinking DJ, past the man she was marrying and the life she had chosen. Each step felt like dragging years behind him, but lighter, somehow. As he reached the exit, Linda's voice cracked through the air behind him. Just one word. "Chris?" He paused, hand on the door. But he didn't turn around. He walked out into the sunlight, the cheers of a wedding behind him mixing with the silence of something that used to be love. The air outside was warm, but Chris felt cold. Not the kind of cold that made you shiver, but the kind that hollowed out your chest. The kind that reminded you you were finally done, finished, empty. He didn't look back at the building behind him, didn't care what happened next inside those walls. He'd done what he came to do. As he reached his car, the gravel crunching under his shoes, he heard footsteps, fast ones. He turned just as Mary came rushing up behind him, heels in one hand, clutching the perfume bottle in the other. "Chris! Wait!" she called out, a little out of breath. "Don't go yet." He leaned against the car door. "You're gonna tell me I went too far?" She shook her head. "No. Honestly, it was brutal. But she deserved it." Chris raised an eyebrow. "So you're not mad?" Mary looked down at the perfume in her hand. "No, she's been lying to herself, to everyone. Taylor's not you, and she knows it. She thought she wanted something simpler, safer." Chris scoffed. "What, like I'm dangerous?" "No," Mary said gently. "Like you made her feel too much. People get scared of real love, Chris. It's easier to be with someone who doesn't see all your cracks." That made him go quiet for a second. He stared off at nothing, hands in his pockets. "You always sided with her," he muttered. "I did," Mary admitted. "But I also watched her destroy the best thing that ever happened to her. I told her she was making a mistake, but she kept saying you'd get over it, that you were strong, that you didn't need her. She was right about one thing," Chris said. "I don't need her." There was silence for a while. Then Mary asked, "What are you going to do now?" Chris looked at her, really looked. The way her eyes had a kind of tired warmth to them, like someone who had carried someone else's secrets too long. He noticed the way she clutched the perfume, not like it was a gift anymore, but like it meant something else now. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe start over." "With who?" she asked softly. He laughed under his breath. "Didn't think that far ahead." Mary took a step closer, searching his face for something. "You were good to her, Chris. Better than she ever deserved. I don't think she realized it until she saw you today." She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I know that look. That's the look of someone realizing they picked a cage over a home. Chris didn't say anything, just stared, down at the gravel, the little stones that felt more solid than his last relationship. Mary hesitated, then said, "You know, for what it's worth, I never gave that perfume back to her. She gave it to me once, years ago, and I've always kept it. You just reminded me of why I liked it so much." Chris looked up slowly. "You already had one?" Mary smiled. "Yeah, she probably forgot. But I didn't. I remember the day she wore it after you gave it to her. She looked in the mirror and said, 'This is the first time I feel like someone really sees me.' That hit hard. He hadn't heard that story before. He opened the car door, then paused. "You ever wonder what would have happened if she hadn't left?" Mary shrugged. "You'd probably be in there, watching someone else walk down the aisle with your heart in their hands." He let out a bitter chuckle. "And now?" Mary stepped in closer. "Now, maybe it's time someone else gets a chance to hold it." He studied her for a moment. The way she looked at him, not like he was broken, not like he was some ex she had to pity, but like she saw something still standing in the ashes. "You want to get out of here?" he asked. She smiled. "You buying coffee or just handing out more emotional grenades?" "Depends. You still have the hoodie?" "It's in the car." "Then I'm buying." They got in together. The venue behind them disappeared in the rear view mirror. And as they drove off, Chris didn't feel cold anymore. He just felt done. With the past, with pretending, with carrying someone else's silence like it was his fault. Later that night, Chris and Mary sat across from each other in a quiet corner booth of a small coffee shop tucked off a side street. It was one of those places that felt untouched by the world, dim lights, jazz music low in the background, and just enough people around to make it feel alive without being loud. Mary stirred her coffee slowly, not really drinking it, just moving. The spoon like she was thinking through 1,000 things. Chris had barely touched his. They'd been quiet for a while, and it wasn't uncomfortable. Just strange. Strange how someone who used to be a side character in your life suddenly felt like they might have been waiting in the wings all along. You really okay? Mary finally asked, not looking up. No, Chris said, honest as ever. But I will be. Mary nodded slowly. You were never her plan, you know. Even when you were together, she had this weird fantasy about marrying someone like Taylor. Rich family, stable job, no emotional messes. Chris raised an eyebrow. So I was the emotional mess? She smiled softly. No, you were real. She just wasn't ready for real. He looked down at his coffee, watching the cream swirl like a storm he couldn't stop. I used to think if I gave her everything, every little piece of me, she'd stay. I didn't realize I was just teaching her how to leave with more. Mary's expression shifted, like something heavy settled in her chest. You know what? She said to me the night before she gave all your stuff back. Chris looked up. What? She said. I don't feel guilty. He'll be fine. Chris always bounces back. Like you were some rubber ball she could throw against a wall. Blinked slowly. Guess she was half right. No, Mary said firmly. You didn't bounce. You broke. You just figured out how to walk with the pieces. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The cafe's door opened now and then, letting in short bursts of cool night air. Chris leaned back in the booth, studying her. Why are you being so honest with me? Because you deserve it. Everyone else lied to you, including me. He didn't answer, just let the words sit there. Mary reached into her purse and pulled out the hoodie, his hoodie, that she'd taken earlier. This thing's got more history than most people's relationships, she said, setting it on the table. She used to wear it like armor. She didn't need armor with me, Chris said quietly. That was the point. I know. They sat there, both staring at the hoodie like it had its own story to tell. Mary leaned in slightly. You think she regrets it? Everything? Chris shrugged. Does it matter? Maybe not. But I think she does. I saw her face when you handed out those gifts. She looked like a girl watching her house burn down and realizing she left the photo albums inside. Chris smirked. Too late to run back in, huh? Way too late. Outside, the streetlights painted golden streaks on the sidewalk. Chris glanced at his phone. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen for a moment, then disappeared before he opened it. He didn't have to. He knew it was her. Do you ever wonder, he asked suddenly, if some people are just meant to teach us pain? Mary nodded. Yeah, but I think some people show up after to teach us how to breathe again. He looked at her. Really looked. You trying to teach me how to breathe? She smiled, more sad than flirty. No, I'm just trying to remind you that you still can. He let out a slow breath, the kind that feels like letting go of a stone you've been holding too long. Then he said, You want to get out of here? Mary blinked, surprised. To where? Chris stood up and grabbed the hoodie. Anywhere, everywhere, I don't know, just not here. She stood too, and for the first time that night, there was something close to lightness between them. They walked out into the cool night together, side by side. Two people no longer orbiting someone else's choices, just moving forward. Maybe for the first time. A few days passed. Chris didn't go back to his apartment right away. It felt too hollow now, too heavy with all the memories he was trying to outrun. So he stayed with a friend for a bit, spent late nights driving nowhere, and when he wasn't avoiding sleep, he found himself texting Mary. She always replied. Always. Sometimes, with nothing more than a dumb meme or a sarcastic, still breathing, but it helped. It was like she knew the exact weight of silence and how to keep it from crushing him. Then came Friday night. Mary texted, Up for something unplanned? Chris stared at the message for a few seconds before responding. Only, if it doesn't involve weddings or emotional landmines, she replied immediately. Just bring the hoodie. An hour later, They met in the parking lot of a rundown drive-in theater on the edge of town. She'd brought snacks, too many snacks, and Chris brought the hoodie, folded over his arm like a familiar ghost. The air smelled like popcorn and engine oil, and a cheesy horror film flickered in the background, forgotten as soon as it started. They didn't really watch the movie. They talked about music, bad dates, childhood regrets, and the way grief shows up in the form of songs you used to love. It was easy, weirdly easy, which made it feel dangerous. At some point, Chris glanced at her and said, "You ever wonder why people end up where they do? Like, why we make the choices we make?" Mary rested her head against the car window. "I think most people aren't choosing. They're settling. Choosing's scarier." He nodded. "Linda said I was always chasing chaos." "She was the chaos," Mary said quietly. "You were just trying to make it feel like home." That landed harder than she probably meant. Didn't reply for a while. Then Mary asked, "What about Taylor? You think they'll last?" Chris let out a small, joyless laugh. "They might, if he keeps pretending she's happy." Mary turned to look at him. "And if she stops pretending? She'll leave, again. And you?" Chris shrugged. "I'm done being anyone's almost." That made Mary smile. "Good, because you're a lot more than that." The movie ended. The screen went dark. They were the last ones left in the lot, the glow of the dashboard casting soft shadows on their faces. Chris shifted in his seat, his voice low. "Can I ask you something real?" "Always." "Back at the wedding, when I gave you the perfume, you didn't hesitate, not once. Why?" She didn't answer right away, just reached over and gently took the hoodie from where it sat between them. "Because I didn't see it as hers," she said softly. "I saw it as yours, and I wanted something of yours for once." That stopped him. He stared at her like he was seeing something that had been right in front of him but buried under too much noise. "You ever think about us?" he asked. Mary looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Sometimes. Not because I was waiting, but because I didn't want to be the one you ran to when she hurt you. I wanted to be the one you chose." He nodded slowly. "I never really looked at you like that before." "I know," she said, "but you are now." Chris leaned in slightly, not rushing, just moving closer like someone testing the edge of a cliff. "I'm scared, Mary." "Me too," she whispered. They didn't kiss, not yet. But something shifted, something quiet and steady and true. The kind of shift that feels like healing. He drove her home, both of them silent, but filled with a kind of understanding that didn't need words. At her door, she turned and looked at him. "You know, I still have that perfume," Chris smirked. "Guess it smells different now." Mary smiled. "Everything does." She went inside, and Chris stood there for a moment, watching the light under her door. This time, he didn't feel like someone watching love walk away. He felt like someone about to walk toward it. The following week, Chris started rebuilding. The life he'd put on hold for Linda. He reopened old notebooks full of unfinished songs, started running again in the early mornings, and even reconnected with people he hadn't seen in years, people who only knew him before love turned him into a shadow of himself. And Mary became more than just a voice on the other end of his late-night texts. She became a constant. Sometimes they'd meet for coffee. Other times they'd talk for hours on park benches, sharing secrets like they were old lovers. In a new timeline, she didn't pressure him, didn't ask him what they were. She just showed up, consistently, and with a warmth that made it harder for him to remember how cold he used to feel. One night, he invited her over. Not for anything serious, just movies and takeout. She showed up in the hoodie, barefoot, and carrying ice cream. "You always this domestic now?" She joked as she walked in, her hair pulled up in a messy knot. Chris grinned. "Only when I like the company." She smiled at that. It wasn't just a flirty moment, it was acknowledgement of everything they'd been skirting around. They sat on the couch, knees touching, sharing fries out of the same carton. Halfway through a dumb comedy, Mary paused the movie and turned to face him. "I saw Linda today," she said softly. Chris stiffened. "Where?" "Coffee shop downtown. She was alone, looked rough." He didn't say anything at first. Then he asked, "Did she say anything to you?" "She didn't have to. She just looked at me, then at the hoodie. And I knew." Chris nodded slowly. "I haven't heard from her since the wedding. Not directly. She probably knows she wouldn't survive that conversation." He leaned his head back on the couch, eyes on the ceiling. "I wanted closure, you know? I thought handing out those gifts would give me that. But it wasn't the moment that gave me peace. It was after. Being with you. Talking to someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm too much or not enough." Mary blinked slowly. "You weren't too much. You just scared her because you were everything." He looked at her. Her face was calm, open. No judgment, no agenda. "Can I ask you something real?" he said. "You already did," she replied with a soft laugh. "But go on." "Would you have said yes if it had been me?" She didn't hesitate. "Every time." His throat tightened. "Even knowing how messy I was?" Mary leaned closer, resting her hand lightly on his. "Especially because of that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. It wrapped around them like a second skin. Then she whispered, "You're not broken, Chris. You're just unfinished." That did it. Chris reached out and touched her face gently, like she might disappear if he moved too fast. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't a spark. It was warmth, a slow burning flame that had been waiting its turn. They didn't rush anything after that. No declarations, no instant plans, just small steps. More nights together, more walks, more mornings where he'd find her curled up in his hoodie, hair messy, no makeup, smiling like she finally belonged somewhere. And for the first time in years, so did he. But life has a cruel way of testing your peace. One morning, while Chris was fixing coffee, his phone lit up with a call. Linda. He stared at it for a second, heart steady. Not shaken, but cautious. Mary noticed from across the room, her smile faltering. "Are you going to answer?" Chris looked at her, then at the phone. No. He declined the call, turned the phone face down, and walked toward Mary. "You sure?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Yeah. I'm not going back to the fire just because I forgot how it felt to burn." Mary smiled, relief washing over her. Good. They shared breakfast like it was just another day, but something had changed. Chris had finally closed a door that had been left open for far too long, and what waited on the other side wasn't just peace, it was a beginning. A few weeks rolled by. The cold edges of everything Chris had gone through began to soften. Linda's name came up less and less, and when it did, it felt more like a history lesson than heartbreak. His heart no longer flinched at the thought of her. It just shrugged and moved on. Because he had moved on. Life with Mary wasn't fireworks and drama. It was steady. It was soft. It was the way his coffee tasted better when she made it, and how she knew which songs to play when his thoughts got too loud. She understood his silences, and she never tried to fix him. She just stayed, and somehow that fixed more than anything else could. One night, they were at his apartment, lying on the floor, surrounded by open pizza boxes and a playlist of 2000s indie rock humming in the background. Mary stared up at the ceiling like it held answers. "You think Taylor knows?" she asked suddenly. Chris looked over at her. "Knows what?" "That he was always her backup plan." Chris exhaled. "I think he probably knows now." He didn't. looked so sure of himself at the wedding, kept staring at you like he was scared she might change her mind. She didn't, Chris said, and I'm grateful for that. Mary turned her head toward him, her voice softer now. You're really over her, aren't you? Chris nodded. I think I've been over her since the moment she returned everything. I just didn't realize it until I met someone who didn't. Ask me to shrink. Mary looked at him for a long time, like she was memorizing the lines on his face. You deserve someone who sees all of you and still says, I'll stay. He reached over, tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. I've got her. They lay there a bit longer in that warm stillness, the kind that only shows up when you're completely safe with someone. Then Mary sat up, brushing pizza crumbs off her jeans. I've been thinking, she said slowly. Chris raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. Shut up, she laughed. I mean about us. He sat up too, more serious now. What about us? I'm not scared, she said, eyes locked on his. Not of being hurt, not of what this is, but I need to know. Are you in this for real? Not because she hurt you, but because I matter to you? Chris didn't even blink. You're not the backup plan, Mary. You're the first real thing I've had in years. And if I ever made you feel like anything less, I'm sorry, she smiled. You didn't. I just needed to hear it. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny envelope. Also, I kinda got something for you. Chris took it, curious. Inside was a folded photo, an old one, from some forgotten party 2 years ago. Linda was in the center, beaming, but off to the side, barely visible, was Chris, and next to him, laughing with her head thrown back, was Mary. I found this the other day, she said. Back when we were all still pretending things made sense. Chris studied it. I don't even remember this night. I do, she said. You spilled your drink and I handed you a napkin. You said, thanks, you're a lifesaver. And I remember thinking, if he only knew. If I only knew what? That I would have saved you in a heartbeat, even then. Chris looked up from the photo. Her face was calm, honest, vulnerable. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, then whispered, You did. You still are. And just as she smiled, the sound of a knock echoed from the door. They both froze. Chris stood slowly, his instincts prickling. He opened the door cautiously, and there she was. Linda, standing in the hallway like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Her makeup smeared, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours, hair messy, shoes in one hand. Chris, she said in a small, shaky voice. I shouldn't be here. But I didn't know where else to go. Mary appeared behind him, her smile gone, her eyes now guarded. Chris didn't say anything at first, just looked at Linda. This woman, who once meant everything, now standing in the wreckage of choices she thought would protect her. Please, Linda whispered. Can I come in? Chris looked back at Mary, at the life he was building, at the peace he'd fought for, then back at the woman who once returned everything he gave her, including his heart. His hand stayed on the doorknob, and he made a choice. Chris didn't move. For a long second, the only sound was the quiet hum of music still playing inside the apartment. Linda stood there, shivering slightly though the night air was warm, her mascara smeared like a war had been waged behind her eyes. Mary didn't speak either. She just stood a few feet behind him, still barefoot from lounging on the floor, arms crossed lightly over her chest, watching the moment unfold like she knew it would end in one of two ways, and she was ready for either. Chris finally broke the silence. What do you want, Linda? She swallowed hard. I made a mistake. Which one? He asked, his voice flat. Returning all my gifts, or marrying someone who doesn't even know who you really are? Linda winced. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought... Taylor was safe, stable, Chris nodded. You said that before. He's the guy you marry when you're tired of feeling things. I never stopped feeling things for you, she said quickly, desperately. Even that day, when I gave everything back, I was trying to erase the pain. You weren't erasing pain, Chris said quietly. You were erasing me. Linda's eyes welled up. I couldn't breathe with you. It was too intense. You made me feel like I was drowning in everything I wasn't ready for. I wasn't asking you to be perfect, Chris replied. I was asking you to stay. You couldn't even do that, she stepped forward. I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know. I still love you. Behind him, Mary didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt. She just waited, her silence louder than Linda's confession. Chris shook his head. You don't get to come back when the fire dies down and expect warmth. I didn't come for comfort, Linda said, tears sliding down her cheeks. I came because everywhere else feels empty. That's not love, Linda. That's loneliness. She opened her mouth to speak again, but he held up a hand. You returned all my gifts. You made it crystal clear what I meant to you. And now you're here, standing in front of the door to a life I've been building with someone who never once asked me to shrink. Linda's eyes flicked past him to Mary, and her voice cracked. So that's it? You've moved on? Chris turned slightly, looked at Mary, the girl who picked up his pieces without asking for anything in return, who never once tried to compete with a ghost. And in that moment, there wasn't a shred of doubt. I didn't move on, he said softly. I grew up. He gently closed the door. Inside, Mary hadn't moved. She just stood there, still watching him with those same honest eyes. You okay? She asked. Chris let out a long, slow breath. I am now. Mary stepped forward. She'll probably tell herself you closed that door out of pride. Chris met her eyes. Let her. We both know I did it out of peace. They stood there for a second, like the quiet was wrapping around them in gratitude. Then Chris reached out and pulled her in, not out of impulse, not out of pain, but out of knowing, finally, what it meant to choose someone without looking back. As they sat down again, the music in the background changed. Some slow acoustic track neither of them recognized, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, not as aftermaths of someone else's storm, but as the start of something real. Chris rested his head against Mary's shoulder. She leaned into him without hesitation, and for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel like a memory. He felt like home.